The Scottish Covenanters began their military preparations in January 1639. Word spread to the shires to recruit and train soldiers, and the veteran Alexander Leslie was appointed to lead the Scottish forces. Meanwhile, Charles went about raising an army of his own, calling on his nobles to join him in York, accompanied by their own soldiers. The plan was to lead an English army into Scotland and take Edinburgh from the south, while a separate force from Ireland would strike in the west, and the navy landed soldiers behind enemy lines on the east coast. Financially, Charles was in a weak position to launch a war. Revenue from ship money had fallen dramatically, with only 20% of the expected receipts from the writ of 1639 being paid. Incidents of violent assaults on tax collectors were also increasing in number. Adding to Charles's problems was the fact that many of his English subjects were also critical of Archbishop Laud's popish innovations and sympathised with the Scots. A force of 20,000 men was eventually gathered, but Charles's army was poorly trained, equipped and led. In an age of pike and musket, some of his soldiers were raw recruits armed with bows and arrows. Realising the weakness of his position, Charles accepted the Scots' offer of peace negotiations at Berwick on the 18th of June 1639. This temporary truce led to nothing. The king called for Thomas Wentworth, the Earl of Strafford, to return from campaign in Ireland and lead a force against the Scots. Wentworth advised Charles that the war would cost £300,000. Desperate for money, Charles was forced to call Parliament. On the 13th of April 1640, the English Parliament met for the first time in 11 years, but, much to Charles's annoyance, his MPs were more concerned with discussing the issues arising from his period of personal rule than agreeing to financing a war with Scotland. After learning that MPs planned to debate the wisdom of his Scottish policy, he immediately dissolved Parliament on the 5th of May 1640. But with neither side willing to back down from their respective positions, preparations for a second campaign continued. The summer of 1640 witnessed a redoubling of efforts to raise revenue. An additional tax called coat and conduct money was established, but collecting it proved just as difficult as ship money had become. Of the £2,600 demanded in coat and conduct money from Buckinghamshire, only £8 was collected. As with the first campaign, Charles's militia lacked discipline and quality, but this time the Covenanters were on the offensive. On the 20th of August 1640, the Scottish army crossed the River Tweed into England. Within 10 days, and after a minor skirmish at Newburn, they occupied the city of Newcastle. On the 24th of September, the King's Council of Peers met with him at York and refused to cooperate until he called another parliament. Faced with no other options, Charles's commissioners agreed a treaty at Ripon on the 21st of October. By the terms of the treaty, Charles agreed to cede the counties of Northumberland and Durham to the Scots. Newcastle would remain under Scottish control, and, most humiliating of all, Charles would pay £850 per day to maintain the Covenanter army. Charles called his second Parliament of 1640. This Parliament would not be got rid of as easily as the first. It would sit for 8 years, earning the name the Long Parliament, and it was to be the Parliament that would prosecute not one, but 2 civil wars against their king.